Hello. So first of all, thank you to the Northwest Side Housing Center for putting this on, and thank you all for coming. Sure enough, I'm here to talk about property assessments. And firstly, the two stories we just heard from Dave and Brandon, I've been hearing similar stories about all across the county. And I think it's especially important to remember Dave's story about when property assessments are raised or property assessments are inaccurate for a landlord, because that affects renters as well. This affects anybody living in Cook County and living in the neighborhood that sees over assessments, whether they're a homeowner or a renter. So as you'll notice, the PowerPoint was made by Professor Christopher Berry at the University of Chicago. He's given me permission to use it to help explain what's going on. Now, Professor Berry has studied assessments in Cook County, but he's certainly not the only professor, and the University of Chicago is not the only school to have studied this issue. There's multiple schools and multiple nonprofits who have studied it, and they've all come to the same conclusion, which is that assessments, and as a result, property taxes, are regressive and racially discriminatory, both at the same time. And I'll explain that in a minute. So I'm not sure how easy it's going to be able to read, but I will work through it anyways. So when I say that they're regressive, I mean that lower value homes are routinely overassessed, and higher value homes are routinely underassessed. And as a result, the effective tax rate for wealthier homeowners, or wealthier landlords, or wealthier people who own, the tall condominiums, or tall apartment buildings, the effective tax rate for them is somehow lower than the effective property tax rate for poor people, and for lower value properties. And I'll also note that the appeals process doesn't help the problem. Minority neighborhoods are disproportionately affected, and we don't necessarily know the exact methodology in the assessor's office. So this is what I mean by regressive. You'll see as home values, as sale prices, home values increase, that's the effective tax rate. Somehow it goes down. Nobody, or rarely ever, does anybody set out to design a tax where the wealthy pay a lower rate than the poor. But that's exactly what happens here in Cook County because of these assessments. And you'll see a similar thing happens regardless of property value when the percent non-white of a neighborhood increases. The more minorities in a neighborhood, the more likely it is to be overassessed. And that's what this chart shows. And then I'll say that appeals don't help this problem. Certainly people should appeal their taxes and try to save money, and it helps the individual, but it doesn't solve the overall system. And people shouldn't have to appeal to get a fair property tax bill in the first place. But I'll say, after all the appeals are said and done, it's still the case that lower value properties are overassessed and that minority communities are overassessed. And the simple reason is because the people who appeal and the people who succeed are the people who are already being underassessed in the first place. It's not correcting the problem. And this shows here where most of the appeals are taking place in the city, and this is also where a lot of the underassessment occurs in the city of Chicago. So people have been aware of this problem in Cook County for a long time. And the assessor's been aware of this problem for a long time. Right now, we don't know the exact methodology of the assessment process. And the Chicago Tribune has sued the assessor's office to try to figure out that methodology. The assessor's office is fighting that in court and using taxpayer money to fight it. So if we don't have a clear idea of how homes are being assessed, it amounts to, in Professor Berry's words, taxation without explanation. And then, again, I'll be brief here, but this PowerPoint here was shown to the assessor's office in 2014. And this is because the MacArthur Foundation, the genius people, spent over $250 over 250 million, so over $250 million, on, pardon me, over $250 million on retraining and fixing the system in 2015. The assessor announced it and celebrated it in a press release. And everyone went home and thought they did a good job. The assessor received some type of reward. 2 years later, the Tribune finds out that that system was never in place. And this is what that system did as it was explained to the assessor in 2015, and this is what he celebrated. And you can see the benefits. I'm zooming through this so we can stay on time. So for whatever reason, and I can take a guess as to why, the assessors celebrated these fixes in 2015, and yet they never went into effect. And to this day, lower valued homes are being overassessed and minority neighborhoods are being overassessed. Now, my humble suggestion as to why this may be occurring, or at least something I think you all should be aware of, is that over 50% of the campaign contributions to the assessor comes from property tax returns. And so this is not only a story about property assessments, it's a story about campaign finance. And so if you're interested in solving either of these issues, you should be interested in both. And so feel free to come up to me or talk to some of us about either of them. But that's pretty much the story, and I'm happy to answer questions moving forward. Oh, yeah. Sorry, and I have somebody else here from our Revolution who'd like to speak very briefly on this topic. So, Clem Ballenhoff.
Well, thank you, Jack. Jack did a great job of explaining the problem. I just wanted to say for about 30 seconds, really. The shift in property tax burden for minority communities, poor communities, and middle-class communities is over $300 million. Everybody can realize what that could do in neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago. It's outrageous. The assessor knew. He has done nothing about it. He does not even admit there's a problem. The bottom line is, the only way at this point in time to correct the problem, we have an election next year, is to get rid of the assessor.
That's right.
And I mean, this is not a, maybe, this is the only way we're going to do this. And there's a number of people who probably are going to run, but it's important that we beat Joe Barrios. And it's he's been protected by the Democratic Party. He's the chairman of the Democratic Party. The president of the county board, Tony Preckwinkle, says we need another study. We've had 5 studies. We don't need any more study. We know the problem. We know the solution. The Chicago Tribune did a tremendous job in a 3-part series. And in the next short period of time, they're going to be doing a follow-up series, and it's going to be on commercial property. And when Jack talked about the $5 million in political contributions that have gone to funds controlled by Joe Barrios, half of which came from tax lawyers. It's the big tax that this was the tip of the iceberg, what's going on with property tax assessment when we talk about residential property. It affects millions of people, but it also, when they under-assess and give a tax break to places like the Presidential Towers or the Willis Tower or Trump Tower,
That ain't right.
you know, that ain't right. And all of us pay more every single time, whether we're an owner or a renter. So as I said, the bottom line is, you want to fix the problem, that's the way to do it. We've got to get rid of the assessor. Thank you.
Thank you, Clem. Thank you, Jack. You know, Clem kind of stole my thunder. I was going to use that line. It is true. It is true about that commercial tax property. But right now, we're going to have a Q&A. But before we do, I'd like to bring up one of the best progressive voices we have in our state legislature, and that is State Representative Will Guzzardi.
Thanks. Good evening. Sorry, tall. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you to Northwest Side Housing Center for putting this amazing event together. I want to talk more about, I think maybe during our Q&A session, we'll talk about this rent control bill that I'm working on in Springfield, right? We have this important challenge to repeal that law. This is what Frank was talking about, right? There's this crazy law in Springfield that says the city of Chicago can't do anything to keep your rents from going up. City of Chicago is forbidden, it's banned from doing a single thing to keep your rent from increasing. And I want to repeal that in Springfield so the city could finally do something. That's my objective. That's what I'm working on in Springfield. And we're up against some very powerful opponents, right? The people who are making money from this system, right? And so it's a very difficult fight, and the only way that we're going to win, it's precisely what Frank said, is when we all of us who are affected by this, when we all come together. People in our community, people in Kenwood and Bronzeville and Logan Square, and every neighborhood in the city that's affected by this crisis, when we all come together and demand that our elected officials do the right thing by us and not just by the people with money. That's how we're going to fix this. And so this fight is incredibly important to me. I'm sure it's important to many of you as well, and we have to work together to make it happen. But before we do this, I just want to take 1 minute and talk about taxes. And I want to say something that you guys are going to be mad about. Taxes are a beautiful thing. Okay, I know. You guys are like, who is this crazy? Why did we elect this guy? What does he do? Let me just tell you how I feel about taxes, okay? What we do as a society, we agree that we're going to elect people to make decisions for all of us, right? And that we're all going to chip in a little bit of the money that we make every year into a big pot. And we're going to use the money from that pot to take care of everybody. We're going to use that money to educate our children. We're going to use that money to build universities so that they can go get a higher education and get a career. We're going to use that money to provide health care for poor folks who can't afford to pay for it on their own. We're going to use that money to hire police officers and firemen to keep our neighborhoods safe and to keep our buildings from burning down. Right? We're going to take a little bit of money from everybody and put it all in a big bucket and use that money to take care of everybody. That's a beautiful thing. Now, why are we all so darn mad about taxes? There's 2 reasons in my mind. One is because the system is really unfair. What we do is we take the most money from the people who have the least. Right? The people who make the least money pay the most in taxes. And that is just fundamental. It's backwards. Bruce Rauner just announced last year he made $91 million. Last year. Last year. That's more money than all of us in this room put together will ever make in our entire lifetimes. $91 million last year. The year before he made $128 million. And he pays a lower tax rate than we do. Because the people with all the money are writing the rules. Right? They use their money to buy government, and then they write the rules in government so that it gives them big breaks and takes more and more from the rest of us. Right? Why do we pay such high property taxes in this city? It's exactly because the people who own the skyscrapers pay really low taxes. Because they hire the attorneys who make the political contributions, and they go and get the appeals for the skyscrapers, and then the rest of us have to pay more to make it up. Right? So thing number 1 is that the system is unfair. We're taxing our families more because we refuse to tax the rich people. Right? And thing number 2, and I think David talked about this some in his remarks, is that too often the people in charge of government are spending our money in reprehensible ways. Instead of spending it on the things our community needs. I want to give you one example. Last year alone, the city of Chicago paid $50 million in judgments in police brutality cases, right? So police officers beat up kids, shot kids, assaulted people, and they got sued, rightly so, and the victims of that assault were paid $50 million. So because of abuses by a few bad apples in our police office, in our Chicago Police Department, right, that were unwilling to fix this system, instead, the taxes that they just raised in this newspaper today, all of that money is going to pay off settlements because bad cops hurt our kids, right?
That's not entirely true, though. on that Uber and that stuff.
I will tell
That's
you,
not entirely true, though.
But can we wait until we do
we'll have a Q&A session, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But the revenue that's generated by that Uber tax is less than the $50 billion that we paid last year alone in judgments, right? So the taxes that we're raising, instead of going to fund education and healthcare and the basic human rights and necessities that our community has, our taxes are going to a government that's not doing the stuff we want. And so the way to address that problem is to get involved in the democratic process, to elect a government that's going to put our priorities first, that's not going to spend on insider deals and sweetheart deals and loopholes and special favors for their friends. And it's not going to spend on services that are misdirected, that are misguided, policies that are harming our community. We need to elect a government that's going to take that pool of money that we all contribute to, a little bit out of every paycheck, and use that pool of money for the benefit of everyone, and not just a few. That's our charge. That's our responsibility, right? It's your responsibility as voters, as well as my responsibility as an elected official. So I believe in taxes. I do. I know it's a dirty word. I know it sounds crazy. But I think if we had a more fair tax system, a tax system that actually asked the folks at the top to pay what they're supposed to pay, and if we had a government that was spending those tax dollars wisely and effectively and on behalf of our communities, that would be a system that could really make our communities the kind of places we want to live. So, with that being said, I think it's time for us to have our Q&A session, and I know that many of you have questions about what's been said tonight, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Yes, you can go right to your chair. Before I introduce the panel, I do want to acknowledge that we have Vanessa Yanez from Cook County Commissioner of Royal Junior's office is here. Kevin Lamb, right over there from Millie Santiago, Alderman Millie Santiago, as well as Louis Klein from State Representative Guzzardi, and Justin Heath from Alderman Villegas. So I would like to thank you for actually supporting us and for being here. Thank you. So with that said, we have a Q&A, and you'll notice if you have your agenda that this forum is intended to be informative, and it has been for everyone. Please remain respectful at all times. Remember that we are in a place of worship. The next thing is that during questions and answers, the segment, the question must pertain to tax assessment, tax appeals, assessment reform, rent control, stabilization, and renters' rights. And we will be timing people, and you get 2 to 3 minutes. So with that, let me introduce the rest of the panel, and so they can come up and help you out up there. James Rudick, Executive Director from NWSHC, Frank Avellone from the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, and Jack Lockhart from Our Revolution, Illinois. So there is a microphone here. Anyone wants to come up with a question, please do, because we do want to have a call to action, and after that call to action, if you go over to the Our Revolution, Illinois desk or table over there, they will be able to find out what your home should have been assessed, and they will tell you if you need to appeal and what else to do. Lawyers Committee for Better Housing can help renters, and maybe they can help you. They have helped many of ours at Northwest Side Housing, and it's pro bono. So thank you. Something, anyone? Yes?
I'd like to find out, everybody's talking always about school funding and getting taxes for schools and so forth. We started the Illinois Lottery in Chicago to pay for schools. What happened to all that money? I mean, all of a sudden, no money from the lottery is going to pay for schools at all. Back when Jim Thompson was governor, and there was like a $40 million prize that one time, he says, if we have one like this every year, we've got so much money for schools, we don't have to raise taxes for anything. Where did this money go? That's one. Two, all the money that is put out from taxes. Where's the accountability of where this money is being spent? I know for a fact at the end of the year when fiscal budgets are ending, there's money being blown away just to get rid of the budget, because if they got $10,000 this year for the department and they only spend 8, they know if they give back 2, the next year when they come back and say we want 10, they're gonna say, no, we're only gonna give you 8 because that's all you spent. So they blow away 2, and it's a continuous cycle. It's a domino effect. Keeps going and going and going and going, and there's no end in sight, and there's no accountability of where this money's being spent. And these people are not brought to the front to say, what did you do with this money? So that's my question to you, why isn't that being addressed?
You want to start with the letter? Yeah, sure. You hang out that one.
Good question.
Those are both great questions, thanks. And what was your name? I'm sorry.
Mitch.
Mitch, thank you. I want to address the first question about the lottery money and the tax revenues, right? So what happened is the lottery money is going to schools, right? But then we just took the amount of the money that used to be going to schools that the lottery was replacing and then went and spent that elsewhere. So we didn't end up getting any more money for schools, right? It's that the lottery made X dollars, we just took the X dollars from the schools out of there and replaced it with lottery money and go and spent that somewhere else. But that speaks to a bigger problem, which is that for a long time, state government in Illinois hasn't been taking in enough money to pay all of its obligations, right? And so what we did was we did little tricks like this lottery trick where we put this money from over here and replace it over there. And a big thing that we did was we skipped out on making payments to stuff we were supposed to pay. And there's a man in this room who used to be in the legislature, and I'm not going to give him too hard a time for that. But the legislature decided that we don't want to pay our bills that are due today, particularly this is around pension stuff, right? Said, it's too expensive right now. We don't have enough money to pay for everything. So we're going to kick the can down the road on some of these bills and just pay what we owe right now on these things and see if we can get by for a while. And we did that for so long, we kicked the can down the road for such a long time, that now we're coming to this crisis point, where we finally got to pay all those old bills that we never paid back then, plus the bills that come due today, right? And that's why state government finds itself in this fiscal crisis, and it's a perpetual fiscal crisis, because year after year we don't take in the money that we need to pay all of our bills. So that's why I talked about some of the stuff that we heard about earlier, like a progressive income tax, right? Like, so Illinois, I have to get on my soapbox, I'm sorry, it's gonna take 1 second. I have to get on my soapbox about this. Illinois has a flat income tax. Everybody pays the same rate, whether you're a janitor or a billionaire. In the federal government, you have tax brackets, right? When you pay your federal taxes, you have tax brackets. And if you make more, you pay more. If you make less, you pay less. That seems fair, right? That seems reasonable. If we had a system like that in Illinois, we could reduce taxes for everybody in this room, unless anyone here is a secret billionaire, in which case, congratulations. But we could reduce taxes for working folks, raise taxes on the very, very rich guys, and finally have enough money coming in to actually pay all our bills. Enough with the shell games, enough with the phony budgeting, enough with the take the lottery money and swap it out for this stuff. Finally get real with ourselves and pay our bills and pay our obligations, right? And if we couple that with government reform and electing people who aren't going to just do these phony special deals and who are really going to prioritize spending on what matters, I think we can really get things straightened out. But it's not gonna, we're not going to be able to do it until we get real about what we owe and how we're going to pay for it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think just to your second point about, that's right, Eladio. I think the second part about how do we hold people accountable, it's individuals like yourself coming here tonight and telling the elected officials in the room, not just Guzzardi, but our alderman and our county commissioner, that you want answers, right? They serve you. Your tax dollars pay their salary. That's the reality. So you go to their office, you go to them, you come to us and say, we want to know where the spending in my ward, where the spending in my congressional district, where the spending in my state district is going, and why. And if you don't like the answer, then don't vote for them. And tell your neighbors not to vote for them either, right? That's not only our right, it's our duty as residents in a free society. So I encourage you and everyone else here to hold them accountable.
Any other questions? Yes. Dave?
I'm going to make sure our translator translates this. If you have a question in Spanish, go to the back and he'll translate it in English and then he'll give you the answer over the headphones. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you. And please state your name.
Ron Emanuel? No. Our alderman voted against the tax increases,
and they paid for it, but we appreciate them, and it brought a lot of sympathy in our districts. Mr. Guzzardi, I'm a little puzzled because Joe Barrios, you supported his godson, Omar Aquino, and when I questioned your office on that, you said, well, it's kind of a political thing. Second, are you willing to, so I find this kind of weird that you're going up against him now. And then secondly, are you willing to give back your desk clock to Mike Madigan, who has one of the biggest tax appeal law firms in the city? So you're going to go against him. I'd like to know, are you going to go to war with him?
Yeah.
And we appreciate it, but, you know, how are you going to do that?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you for your time.
It's a funny question. Because it reminds me of when I was first running for office in 2012, and then when I ran again in 2014. Not to retell all this history, but I ran against a woman who was the incumbent legislator at the time. Her name was Toni Barrios. She's the daughter of Joe Barrios. And that whole political establishment, Mike Madigan, Joe Barrios, all those guys, they spent a whole lot of money trying to keep me from being here, from being your state representative now.
That's right.
And they said some very despicable things about me at the time. I don't know if any of you guys remember that campaign. Yeah, it was sort of an unpleasant experience, I gotta tell you. And so now I'm in Springfield, and I'm continuing to fight against this same, you know, we talked before about Democrats and how Democrats haven't always had our best interests at heart. I ran against a Democrat because I thought that the Democratic Party, led by Mike Madigan and Joe Barrios and all the way on down, I thought they were doing a bad job of representing our interests. You know, they were in Springfield giving away tax breaks to Sears and the traders downtown and everybody else, and they were cutting services in our communities, right? I thought the Democrats were not standing up for us. That's why I ran. And I'm fighting that fight every day in Springfield with the Democratic leadership down there. You know, I voted against a lot of initiatives that the Democratic Party has been pushing because I didn't think they served the interests of our community. I'm going to continue to do that. That's a really important part of my job, is to hold my own party accountable as well as challenging the bad stuff that the other guys are doing. I'll say I think Senator Aquino has been doing a fantastic job. I don't know if any of you guys live in his district, but I think he's been. Was that? That's certainly true. I know, yeah, I know a lot of people in this room probably voted for Lisa Madigan, despite, you know, we try not to pass the sins of the father or the godfather onto their children. But I think that everyone's responsibility in whatever district they live in is to hold their elected officials to high standards, right? To know what they're doing for you, to know not only who are they related to, but who are they working for, whose interests are they serving. And if they're serving the interests of the big money guys and the power players down in Springfield, vote them out. And if you feel like I become beholden to Mike Madigan or Joe Barrios or whatever other political power people there and not the interests of our community.
Are you willing to stand up to him on this whole issue?
On which issue? I feel like I'm standing up to these guys all the time and kick my butt for it.
I mean, you know, the one guy who really opposed him, he's out. So, I mean, you know, again, I mean, you got your desk clock, right?
And maybe if I can take a little pressure off of Will here, he's in the hot seat. What I would say again is,
you need to stand up to this guy because he's got the biggest.
but I think we all need to stand up to him, right? And that includes Will, and I'm not letting him off the hook, but right, we all as the people have to say we're fed up, right? We live in a system where wealthy people get elected, right? People with privilege get elected, right? People that know people get elected, and we're the everyday people that are dealing with these issues, and none of us are in Springfield, right? Or none of us are in City Hall. And so I think the issue could be with Will, but I think it's also with all of us to how do we say grassroots folks from our community are getting into office? How are we supporting our neighbors who are doing really good work to represent us and not folks that make billions or millions that know nothing about what we go through as everyday people?
And I do want to do that one more thing, and then we'll turn it over to other questions. But so like I said, in terms of standing up to the establishment, standing up to Mike Madigan, right, that's how I got here. That's how I got elected. I ran against these guys, and I beat them. And I stand up to them every day in Springfield, and on a lot of important issues. We could talk about the school funding bill just passed. On a lot of really important issues, they try to persuade me to do one thing, and it's not what our community wants, and I say no to them. And the reason that I'm able to do that is because I know that the people in this community are organized. And that if you have an elected official who's standing up for you, you're gonna stand by them. And if you have an elected official who turns his back on you, then you're gonna get them out of office. That's how I got to be in office in the first place, is because people were organized and got someone elected who's gonna fight for their interests. So I know who I'm accountable to. I know who got me elected. It was not the powerful people, it was not the rich people, it was you guys. And so you guys are the people I answer to at the end of the day.
I guess I'll throw in one quick comment, Ernie. My wife will forgive me for standing up for a Democrat, but I will say, just think for just a second. Will Guzzardi introduced a bill that promotes rent control. Holy cow. I said holy cow because we're in a place of worship, right? But you know, just think about that. What part of the moneyed establishment is at all interested in that, even in the slightest? And if you talk about threatening not only their pocketbook, but I have a more dangerous way of looking at that. I think it's very popular in the public to assume that politicians are purchased. I think it's more dangerous than that. I think that politicians agree with them, that water reaches its own level. That it's not so much that you're bought out by the corporate interests. You believe the same stuff they do, which is why this is a war.
And I agree with Will, Frank, and James. It's one of the reasons we wanted this meeting tonight, was to make sure that you understand, you're informed, you're educated, and you go out and you tell your neighbors, you tell your friends, you say, no, there is a movement going on, and it's going on in this city right now. It's going on in different neighborhoods, and we want you to become part of that. That's why we're here. Any other questions, please? Mitch again?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted, you were talking about this rent control thing or whatever that you sponsored in Springfield. Well, you sponsored it. Who's going to support it?
We are.
Right? Yeah, I understand that. We're supporting him, but I mean, you need legislature to vote for that bill to pass.
Totally.
Who's gonna vote for that? Who's gonna be on your side?
Great question.
Go ahead.
So we have several co-sponsors on this bill already, but so in the state house, there are 118 people. And so in order to get a majority of that, you need 60. 60 is a majority. So I have to find 59 other people on top of me to go vote for this bill if I want to get it passed, right? And we are a long way from there right now. And the reason is, too many of my colleagues are more interested in what the Realtors Association, who has a lot of money, has to say about this issue, than they're interested in what you have to say about this issue, right? So we fix this question two ways. One is we get organized, not just in our community, but we organize our friends and our neighbors in the next district over. You know, south of Fullerton Avenue is another district.
That's right.
Right? West of Irving Park Road is another district.
Right.
I mean, sorry, north of Irving Park Road is another district. West of Austin Avenue is another district. We all know people in those areas. We got to get them engaged in this fight, and we got to get their legislators signed on to this bill, right? And then we also got to throw some people out of office who aren't sticking up for our interests, right? If people aren't fighting for our communities, we got to analyze that. And I know that answer may seem idealistic or naive or to be taking too long of you, but these kinds of big structural changes don't just happen overnight, and I can't just do them alone. I can't go to Springfield as the white knight on the high horse or whatever the hell it's saying. Oh, shoot. Whatever the heck the saying is. I can't do this on my own down there, right? It takes not just me and not just my colleagues, but a movement of people to make this kind of systemic change, and that's where I'm really relying on you
saying
guys.
this rent control thing may take 10 to 20 years?
I'm hoping it's sooner than that, but it's not going to be tomorrow or the next day. I'm hoping it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But that's the timeline we're looking at, and the faster we get organized, the faster it's going to happen.
Yeah, and all I would add is, just like there's this meeting tonight, we're having community meetings in other districts to talk with state legislators and to talk with communities about it. So I think this is maybe the third or fourth meeting of such here in the city in different state districts that we're having. And so our goal is to replicate this with other state representatives to get feedback, right? Because everyone may not be in support of it or may want certain provisions or changes. So this is a listening session, right? It's feedback to hear from you. So as we continue, we can say, well, this looks good, this doesn't, this is what people are saying, so we can continue to refine. And then we go to Springfield, right? And we hold our legislators accountable.
I want one quick shout out to Jawanza. Can you stand up for a second? Joanne Malone from the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. So he's been one of the leaders in this fight. We've been working closely together on this bill since we introduced it. We had our first press conference on a rainy day down in your neck of the woods. And so, he's coming up here from Kenwood to work on this with us. And he's hosted meetings down there, meetings in other communities around the city. So this is happening. It's happening. It's not going to happen overnight, but the movement is growing every day. And there's meetings like this happening all over the city. And we're going to make this happen.
Yeah, but the other thing is people need help now.
Yes,
They don't need
yes.
help 5 years from
Yeah,
now.
And they do, and that's what we're trying to do, that's why.
Ernie, I have one thing real quick. So there's a thing called the Northwest Home Equity Assurance Program. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but there's $9.6 million sitting in a bank account right now that isn't being used, that's for the Northwest side, that we've been fighting for 3 years with the city of Chicago and the mayor's office to release that money to help homeowners now for home repairs, for energy assistance, if you need a month of your rent or your mortgage payment paid. $10 million that you've paid in taxes sitting and nothing's happening. So to turn our attention to our city elected officials, right, we need them to hold the mayor accountable because the mayor appoints the people to that board and they've done nothing.
And yeah, let me also just say, these guys, Northwest Side Housing Center and Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, do amazing work with people who are in need right now. Right? If you're dealing, give a round of applause to these guys. They do incredible work day in and day out. And it's so important. And it's so important for all of us to support the work that they do. And if we don't address the systems, the structural stuff like this rent control thing, the stuff that's going to take years, the long fights to rebuild the system in a way that's more fair, these guys are going to have too much work, right? They can't keep fighting this battle every single day, day in and day out, under a broken system. They got to keep doing what they're doing, and my job is to fix the systemic stuff, to try to make their jobs a little easier. And that's where we all have to work, right, on this long-term movement building scale.
Ernie, I might add that I want people to feel a sense that we're not in this alone. Just think that 2 years ago, if you would have said $15 an hour, people would have thought you're on drugs. But now, everybody agrees. Every Democratic contender for the Illinois gubernatorial seat is for $15 an hour, right? If you would have said progressive income tax in Illinois 2 years ago, they would have thought you were on drugs. But every Democratic candidate for the gubernatorial seat next year is for a progressive income tax. Half the country favors Medicare for all single payer, no profit motive, cut the insurance companies out. 2 of the gubernatorial candidates in Illinois are promoting that. So what am I saying? That once the fire gets lit, this is happening not only in our state and in our city, it's happening all over the country. Referendums on rent control and just cause for eviction passed overwhelmingly. 19 out of 21 referendums passed in last year's election cycle across the country. These things are happening not only here and across the country, they're happening globally because everybody finally realizes that these problems are interconnected and dependent on each other, and that the only way we're going to solve them is through intensely democratic participation. So we're not alone. When Representative Guzzardi mentioned some other forums, the one that Joanne Malone has been staging around the city, in Pilsen, 190 people. In Bronzeville 2 weeks ago, 240 people. And this is happening everywhere. And so it's starting, the ball's rolling.
That's correct. And in fact, if you remember at the beginning, I stated the state of Oregon is definitely going with a no rent, they wanted to lift the ban with rent control in Oregon. So it is happening in different states, and it is happening, believe me, in this city. I've been there. I was in Brownsville. I was in Pilsen. People are starting to come together, and they realize they have to come together in order to win. Otherwise, we're not. We're a community and we gotta build Belmont Cragen. So we have to get with our neighbors. We have to talk to our neighbors. And we need to tell them what was happening here tonight and make it grow. Any more questions? Yes. And please state your name.
Jeanette Hoyt from the south side. We're talking about our ability to pay for our housing. And I'm wondering, as I go to work at Shire High School, driving from the south side, through alleys, down Oakley, from the expressway, the people I'm seeing that are living under the viaducts. And we have a homeless population that is astounding. It was estimated in 2014 to be 500,000 people. 500,000 people. 500,000 people homeless in Chicago. That's unreal. 10,000 of which were high school students. And I don't even know how they do that. Putting them in SROs does not work. Expecting Catholic Charities to take care of them, the Jesus USA people, they don't have enough room. And besides, which is very hard to warehouse people. Would you guys ever consider tiny homes, and is that part of also our housing crisis? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question and it's a real problem. You know, one thing that I say is we tore down public housing through CHA and we didn't replace those units, right? And so we're still fighting with Lathrop Homes to try and get a one-for-one replacement, but we tore down 25,000 units of public housing in Chicago and replaced less than a third of those units. So where did we expect people to go when we took away their housing? So I think tiny homes can be a solution, and I think it's interesting to think about zoning. I'll give a shout out to the 31st Ward that recently created a zoning committee for the 31st Ward. So any decisions on any residential or business zoning that happen in the 31st Ward must go through a community process before they're approved. So that can mean changing the number of units, it can mean changing the rent. They're the first, right, in Belmont Cragen to do that, and I'm sure that others will. So it's a great question, and one that the next zoning meeting I'm going to bring up and say, how are we thinking about tiny homes? It's just one answer, though, to a much larger problem that we don't care about people in this city, especially around housing, right? You work your whole life, you're disabled, you have a mental health issue, and you're out on the street, and that's unacceptable. We live in the wealthiest country in the world, yet we have people living under viaducts, and so personally, it's what we do at the Housing Center every day. It's what the church does here. It's what all of us are in this fight for. So we're trying, but it's like, you know, we're throwing rocks, David at Goliath, right? And we're trying to hit that monster. We're not going to stop. But I think we do have to, again, hold our elected officials accountable to a unified housing strategy. The mayor of this city has no housing policy. He hasn't had one. He's going on a third term, and there's been no affordable housing strategy. Right? We have to talk about that, right? We have to have our aldermen talk about it. We have to push back and say that that's unacceptable. You know, we have homeowners that are working, right, that lose their homes and then they're homeless and they're working. You know, that's not right. And so I didn't really answer your question, but I felt at least, you know, I'm taking it back and I commit to do that. And if you signed in, we'll make sure that we follow up with you. And I'm sure our elected officials here are also wheels turning because developers are making a lot of money in our community. So how can we have them be more responsive? So thank you for that question.
I also want to say Juanza is also working on a referendum to get on the ballot. So work with him and work with us on that to lift the ban of rent control. Yes, and please state your name.
Oh, why don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
you have a question here first.
Maybe you could stay after. I just want to be respectful of time.
Yes, we are running a little over. And Joanna, can you stay a little bit and talk to people in that?
But Maria, Maria.
Hola, muy buenas noches. Mi nombre es Mari Carmen Zavala.
She's saying, good evening, my name is Mari Carmen Zavala.
Estos temas que estoy escuchando son muy importantes para mí, ya que soy referente de la comunidad y porque nosotros, como usted representante, no puedo pronunciar su apellido,
Está bien.
pero nosotros lo apoyaremos a usted siempre y cuando usted nos sea fiel a nuestra comunidad y a nuestros padres de escuelas. Y te vamos a apoyar siempre y cuando usted sea fiel a nuestra comunidad y nos muestre su confianza para nosotros apoyarlo y nos represente en nuestra comunidad.
So she doesn't have a question, she's basically just making a comment. So she says this topic is important to her as a renter in the community, and she wants you to know, Representative Guzzardi, that as a parent leader in her schools, that she's gonna support you, right? But she also says, right, it's accountability. We're hearing that today. She says, if as well you stay true to the needs of this community. So it's what she wanted to share with you.
Muchas gracias, señora. Bueno, para mí lo que importa nomás es que trabajamos juntos, right? Cuando yo estoy luchando en Springfield para lo que necesita nuestra comunidad aquí, juntos, cuando ustedes trabajan en su escuela y yo trabajo en el nivel sistemática, ¿sí? Es así que podemos cambiar las estructuras de nuestra sociedad. Okay?
When he started, he knows Spanish, so good job.
Dang, he got me. Buen trabajo.
So what the representative basically said, hey, I'm translating for you. So when he got in office, he didn't know Spanish, I don't think. So good job, Mama Craig. So basically, ya usted entendió, so okay. You could
I
translate
just wanted to make the point that the support runs both ways, right? It's that this works when your elected officials are supporting you and you're supporting us, right? So that when we're working to try to make the systemic change and you're working to make the neighborhood change, that together is a healthy relationship between an elected official and a community. And when that's working, we can make really important structural change. And when it's not working, you've got to make a change in who's representing, right? Sí.
Porque si nosotros vamos a apoyarlo para que nos represente a nuestra comunidad, no queremos que pase lo que pasó con el señor Manuel, que antes de que cuando se iba a volver a reelegir, él prometió que si uno lo apoyaba y para tomar otra vez el puesto que tiene, él iba a apoyar a todas las escuelas de CPS para que no las cerraran y no les quitaran a los niños sus derechos y no les retiraran los beneficios de los que son los desayunos y más que nada lo que son los niños de educación especial. Cuando él lo hizo, que él se religió y que tomó el puesto, ¿qué fue lo que pasó? Empezaron a cerrar escuelas. Empezaron a cortar los fondos principalmente de los niños de educación especial, que es lo que más nos necesita. Entonces yo digo que si uno vote, la gente que puede votar por los que están adentro del poder, porque si es cierto, usted lo dijo, que aquí se paga y le hacen más caso a los que tienen poder, tienen el dinero para pagar y mover aquí y allá, y es cierto. Y para la gente llegar a donde está, ¿de quién se beneficia? Sino del pueblo. De los mismos nosotros que votamos para que estén en donde están, y no es justo que nos hagan lo que hacen, ya nada más se sientan en el poder y se olvidan de lo que prometen. Por eso lo que yo digo, si lo vamos a apoyar a usted para nuestra comunidad, no se habla con lo que va a suceder.
So she was saying that, her words, not mine, that Mayor Emanuel, when he came in, made a lot of promises about what he was going to do, particularly for our schools, that he was going to invest in our neighborhood schools, invest in Chicago public schools, that he wasn't going to cut funding from our schools, he wasn't going to close our schools, he was going to make sure our children with special needs got the resources that they needed. And then what happened when we voted for him, he turned around and closed schools. He cut funding for the children who needed them, and particularly, as she said, especially for children with special needs. And you guys have been seeing in the news maybe in the last couple of days that there's been a tremendous, a sort of astonishing breakdown, moral failing in the way that we've been cutting resources for children with special needs. So what do we do about this, right? How do we know when we support you, when you support me, that I'm going to then go out and do the things that you said and not just turn around and do something else? And this, again, is this question about accountability, and we keep coming back to over and over again tonight. right? Es una cuestión de contabilidad, ¿sí? Es importante que sabemos todos lo que están prometiendo cada representante, cada concejal, cada alcalde, todos los miembros del gobierno, qué están prometiendo y qué están haciendo. Right? Y cuando sabemos, cuando discutamos con nuestros vecinos lo que está pasando en el gobierno, en el político, así podemos asegurarnos que están haciendo lo que han prometido, y si no, podemos cambiar el gobierno. Podemos hablar con los vecinos y decirles, oh, él ha prometido que va a hacer esto, pero está haciendo esto. Necesitamos cambiar, necesitamos un nuevo representante. Organizámonos para elegir un nuevo representante, ¿sí? Entonces, el saber es el poder, ¿sí? Saber lo que están prometiendo, saber lo que están haciendo, es así que podemos descubrir nuestro poder como comunidad y cambiar el gobierno, ¿sí? What I was saying is, yeah, just that it's again this question about accountability, and accountability starts with knowledge, right? Knowing what our elected officials are promising us, and then knowing what they're actually doing, right? And you guys being here tonight is such a critical part of that, right? Us having this conversation is a part of the knowledge that's vital for having the power to take our communities back. Know what I'm promising you that I'm going to do. Know what I told you I wanted to do when I came into this job, and know what I'm doing. And when those things are aligned, then be with me. And when those things are misaligned, when I'm not doing what I promised, when I'm breaking my word to you, then hold me accountable. Come to my office and go to the voting booth, right? And elect somebody who's going to do what they promised you. When you see a mayor or an alderman or a representative or whatever who promised you one thing and turn around and do the next thing, you got to elect somebody else because they're not keeping their word. That's what accountability looks like in a democracy.
Thank you. So, no, we're going to cut off. To be respectful of time, we really are at 8 o'clock. But before we break, and before I thank everyone, I'd like Joanza Malone to please come up and give us a couple minutes on Good to Bad. Come up here and do it, please. Because it's very important.
Thanks, Larry. Hi, everybody.
Bye.
Great job, guys. Give these guys a round of applause. So, appreciate you putting me on the spot here. Just want to thank all of you for being here. This is something that is moving across the city and across the state. There are groups outside Chicago who are looking at this campaign and trying to figure out how to get on board because their communities are suffering from rents going sky high. We have counties in this state where more than half the people are paying close to 70% of their income on rent, just on rent. How would you like to go to work, they pay you, as soon as you cash your check, you're turning over almost the whole check. What's the point of working?
That's right.
And that's happening right now here in Illinois. So this fight that we're waging, well, I'm not looking to do this for 5 years. We need relief right now, right? So your work, the conversations you have with your neighbors, conversations you have with your friends, conversations you have with people you don't even like, is going to make sure that this gets done. Because it's up to us. All right, thanks, Ernie. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Ernie, if I could just say one thing. We have some young people here in the room with us tonight from DePaul University that traveled to be here, so I just want to give them a shout out because they're the future. So to our young people that are here, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And to our high school students, I think they left, but to our youth, keep up the good work. So thank you.
All right. And, well, we'd like to thank James Rudick, Frank Avellone, State Representative Will Guzzardi, and Jack Lockhart. So give them a big round of applause. And the staff members that came from our aldermen as well as our commissioners. But most of all, give yourselves a big round of applause for coming out tonight and being part of this. And Joanza Malone, thank you. and let's get together. As Frank said, housing is a human right, not a commodity. Fight, fight, fight. Housing is a human